When my wife and I were first together, one of the things we really enjoyed doing was cooking for each other. We took turns sometimes we cooked together. But whenever it was my opportunity to cook for her, I always really enjoyed that act of putting that food on the table, knowing I had served her. We began to have children, and our first child came along, and it changed everything. In fact, at that point, I took over the primary responsibility for cooking the meals pretty much every day. I loved it because there was something about the act of going to the grocery store to figure out what the menu would be for the week, to make sure we had the right items that we needed, to bring that back and to prepare the meal and get it timed just right so it fit with our schedule. And I could put that meal on the table for my wife and our son. Our second child came along, and then in time our daughter came along, and soon we were 5. That complicated things a little bit more, but each time I would bring that meal to the table, it just felt so good to serve each other. You know, the thing about that is that we've tried to share that with our own children, and as they've gotten older, their activities have made it harder for us to find that time at table together. Sometimes their calendars are more full than their parents' calendars. But we still try to make time to sit down together as a family. And we've tried to make sure that our kids are part of that serving process because we think it's important for them to learn the value of serving others. We're not quite ready to hand off the kitchen to them to have them prepare the whole meal, but they can still help. Sometimes they help prepare. They can at least set the table and provide drinks for each other and make sure that the table's cleaned up afterward. Now, as you can imagine, they don't always do this joyfully. I don't think any kid ever does. Sometimes they argue with each other. It's your turn to empty the dishwasher. I did it last night. Sometimes they all just split and nobody wants to help, and we have to go gather everybody back together. But something about the act of serving is really important, and we want to pass that on to our kids. I'm reminded of a story in the Bible when Jesus was walking along with the disciples, and some of them sort of fell behind a little bit, and Jesus could hear them. They were having an argument, and he probably knew what they were arguing about anyway, but when they got to their destination, he turned to them and he said, "What were you arguing about as we were walking along?" Well, they sort of looked at each other sheepishly and probably kicked the dirt a little bit, and finally they said, "Well, Jesus, we were actually arguing about which one of us would be the greatest in your kingdom when it comes." Now, Jesus told them, guys, that's not the way it's supposed to work. He took that opportunity to share with them that the way that they were to lead was not the way the rest of the world sees leadership. He said, you're not to act the way that people in other places do. You're not to hold positions of authority over others or try to lord your responsibility over them. Rather, what he was asking them to do was to be servants themselves, to be servant leaders who took care of each other, who took care of the people around them. He probably demonstrated that more clearly than any other time in the very last night of his life, the very last time he would be together with those disciples. They went into an upper room, and the story tells us that Jesus took a towel and wrapped it around himself. Then he poured out water, and he began to wash their feet. The master washing the feet of the disciples. They were really troubled by this. In fact, they said, "Jesus, that's the sort of thing servants should do. You shouldn't do that." And he said, "This is what I'm trying to show you. This is how you are to care for one another. Make yourself less important and make others more important. Serve. Show love to each other." Probably the best example of a story about serving in the Bible, one of the best known examples anyway, comes from the Gospel of Luke. In the 10th chapter, Jesus tells a story about a man who went on a journey. And as he went on this journey, he was ambushed and he was beaten up and robbed, and he was left for dead. It was a busy road, so other people came by it, and some people came by and looked at him and ignored him. Some people thought they were too good or too important or just too ill-equipped to help him. Whatever the reason, they walked right on by. But then somebody saw him and did something about it, and it was a Samaritan. And in Jesus' time, a Samaritan was the least likely person to help. But he saw that man in need, and he went to him, He dressed his wounds. He gathered him up and he took him and handed him off to people who could help with his healing process and get him further along the way. That was such an incredible opportunity because he saw in that moment that serving, helping other people isn't somebody else's job, it's everyone's job. Most importantly, he knew in that moment it was his job. Serving isn't an easy thing for us to learn. It's a part of who we are called to be as disciples of Jesus, but sometimes we just aren't sure we want to. Sometimes we're too busy, or we don't think we have the right tools and equipment or expertise. Sometimes we just don't want to. But as disciples of Jesus, we are called to be people who serve, to recognize taking care of people isn't someone else's responsibility, it's our responsibility. And along the way as we're serving people, it can be such a joyful experience, just like putting that meal on the table for our families and learning how to take care of each other. We get so much joy out of serving and giving. There are lots of ways we can serve right here in our community. You could read to children in a school. You could volunteer at the hospital. You could be part of a ministry that we have here at the church where you prepare food and take it to homeless people. You can provide diapers and personal hygiene items. You can walk alongside people as we work together to live into the kingdom of God. Maybe you're called to go on a mission trip with our youth or to go somewhere around the world like Haiti or Cambodia. Whatever it is that God is calling you to do, I know this. Every one of us is called to serve in some way, whatever our ability level, whatever our time availability is. Everyone is called to serve. So think about the opportunities around you. How many ways can you think of that you can serve each other? What are the ways that you can be in service this week to show your love for Jesus and to grow in your discipleship?